Distinguished chairpersons, colleagues, good evening. A big thank you to Professor Singh and Professor Ajay for this kind invitation. And I'm going to be walking you through where we stand with pediatric liver transplantation. So if we look at the indications of pediatric liver transplantation, the list has expanded, and we now transplant for a number of conditions in which there is no liver failure, but the extrahepatic complications can be prevented with a new liver. Of course, biliary atresia remains the commonest indication, and more than 50% of all pediatric liver transplants across the world are performed for biliary atresia. And of course, they are the dominant in the less than 2 age group. But we also transplant a fair bit in older children who've managed to tide through the first few years post-Kasai. But what is very interesting is the increasing group of metabolic and genomics. So about 20 years ago, the list of what used to be idiopathic was 30%. But that has really now shrunk. And every week we understand and learn about a new entity that can benefit from liver transplantation. So how successful is liver transplantation? If we look at the Japanese Liver Transplant Society registry, and if we look at 20-year survival, close to 80%. And this is for transplants that were performed in the late 90s. When we have data for transplants performed in the early 2000s, this will be even more impressive. So if we look at prediction of 20, 30-year survival in children from the US, 84% 20 years, 80% 30 years. If we look at European data, survival is improved from 74% 5 years to 85%. And of course, the most impressive data now is from Korea, where they're actually looking since 2012 of 98.6% survival at 5 years. So clearly, liver transplantation is very successful therapy. Well, the journey began in India, and the first pediatric liver transplant was attempted in our unit in January 1998. It was a cadaver. We had primary graft non-function, and because no organs became available for several months, we decided to embark on a living-related program. And the first successful liver transplant in India was performed in our unit in November 98. We waited for a couple of years and then published this as a case report, and this was a child with biliary atresia. A year later, the first successful liver transplant for acute liver failure due to hepatitis A. When we established the program, there were 4 key questions that were raised. Will liver transplant be possible in small children given the complexity? Will parents agree to donate? And we really didn't have choice with cadavers. Won't there be this bias against the girl child that we see in neonatal surgery, pediatric surgery? And won't liver transplantation be only for the rich? Let me answer the progress that we've made on all 4 counts. Well, it was very hard to establish a program, and in fact, patients used to get referred to us very late when they had a week or 2 weeks to live. So very few patients over a very long, nearly a decade-long period were fit for a transplant. Out of those, more than half the families were not willing because they weren't very sure if it was worth the investment. So in this agonizingly long period, we could only transplant 16 children. And the scenario for the adults wasn't all that great either, because we could only transplant 88 children in a decade. So there were lots and lots of roadblocks, and it really was like breaking your head against the wall, but the wall finally broke. When we actually looked at, and this was an editorial we published in Indian Pediatrics, 7 years after the first transplant, only 29 pediatric liver transplants had been performed in the country. We'd done 13, 16 others had been performed in 6 centers. But then the watershed for our program and for many other programs actually happened around the 2006-2007 time period, because the initial cohort of patients had gone back into the community, were leading a normal life, so there was greater acceptability among the medical community and also among the public at large. So since 2007, we've had patients come in earlier. Families are keen to get transplanted, and we've transplanted 526 children and 3,952 adults. When we published another editorial marking 15 years of liver transplantation in 2013, 7 years after the first, 350 pediatric liver transplants had been performed. And in the editorial after that, marking 22 years, we had reached 150 pediatric liver transplants across the country. Survival figures were close to 90%, and the first ABO-incompatible pediatric liver transplants had been reported. If we look at the liver transplant journey, and I'm afraid it's very hard to get this data, but pre-2005 we don't have it. So we are averaging about 4,000 liver transplants a year now, and you can see that there was a recovery post-COVID that happened in 22. Overall, close to 27,000 liver transplants have been performed. 23% of these have been deceased donor. Pediatric, close to 2,000 now, of which only 7% have been cadavers. There are 313 liver transplant centers in India. 42 centers have performed pediatric liver transplant, but of course, when we look at the numbers, there are only less than 7 that actually do large numbers and 2 that do fairly large numbers every year. And this year, we should end the year at about 300 pediatric liver transplants. So we've now performed at Apollo 25,000 solid organ transplants and consistently been performing more than 1,200, including 1,700 last year. And till July this year, we've done 975 solid organ transplants, including 171 livers. So overall, our experience of pediatrics is now 526 out of the 4,582, and biliary atresia stands tall. The list of indications responsible has, of course, grown. This is the first child with Crigler-Najjar syndrome that came from Qatar for transplant, which was then published as a case report. This is a child with a combined liver-kidney transplant, living-related for hyperoxaluria, baby transplanted at 3.5 kilos, the smallest, and a child who was retransplanted. Avi's team reported the youngest domino liver transplant from MSUD. Subhash reported a whole series. So the list of indications has really expanded. Mohammed reported the first robotic monosegment donor hepatectomy, a fair amount of data on ABO incompatible from Avi, from Subhash. When we look at outcomes in India, this was a paper that we published several years ago, and we were really lucky. We actually had 100% survival in this cohort of less than 7.5 kilos. And over the years, if we look at first 100, 200, we are looking at survival rates at about 87%. So clearly significant progress, and liver transplantation now is pretty well established. What about parents donating? Gandhiji had said a man can never be a woman's equal in the spirit of selfless service with which nature has endowed her. And this was so true. We had very few dads who were willing to donate. So in the first decade, we largely had moms, but finally dads got courage, and now it's about 50-50. I'm hoping for dads to become 60%, hopefully soon. Bias against the girl child. This was so evident, and for us in pediatrics, we know that for neonatal surgery, for pediatric congenital heart surgery, more boys get operated. And the bias was as evident at 72% for boys, 27% were girls. But again, happy to report, it's 52% boys, 48% girls, so catching up. So this is pretty significant as far as the last decade has been. But I want to now move on to something that was a matter of concern for a lot of people and for us when we set up the program. Will liver transplantation only be for the rich? So let me spend the next few minutes talking about reaching those with no resources. Now all of us know that we live in two Indias. We have Indias where children can go off to Disneyland for a holiday twice a year, and then we have those that find bare existence very hard. We have children who have the fanciest of birthday parties, and then we have children who struggle to get 2 square meals a day. So we reached out to temples, we reached out to mosques, for zakat, we reached out to the church, gurdwaras, charities, crowdfunding, pay it forward concept, individual donors, with the idea of reaching out to those that did not have any resources. And there was success. This was a child that came to us in the back of a vegetable truck from Kashmir. You can see the ascites, autoimmune, hepatitis, and the family had no resources. We were able to raise enough money, not just for the transplant, but also for the family to be able to build a home in their village that did not exist. So we got initial success with the crowdfunding, but then very soon we realized that there was a lot of competition for crowdfunding, and from bone marrow transplants to a whole lot of conditions, congenital heart, and this really was not sustainable. So you could get lucky sometime, but not every time. And we were reminded of the talisman that Gandhiji had, which which really reads, whenever you're in doubt or when the self becomes too much, recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man, woman you've seen, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him or her. So we have devoted the last 7 years actually focusing on this. I'm really happy, and for our foreign guests, this is $3.5 million that we've raised in charity in the last 5 years for pediatric liver transplants. We actually wrote a paper on this, and we have now identified people who believe in what St. Francis of Assisi had said, for it is in giving that we receive. We have individual donors that have pledged to us 50 to 60 lakhs a year. And all one needs to do is make a phone call and the money gets transferred in 1 hour. So now we are not dependent on crowdsourcing. And I just want to share a couple of examples on where this matters when you don't have time. 8-year-old girl from Siwan in Bihar, known case of Wilson's onchelation, being managed very well at the All India Institute, liver transplant advised, condition deteriorated, plasma exchange were performed at the institute, excellent care. The child developed encephalopathy, and we all know if a child with Wilson's disease develops encephalopathy, they will die without a liver transplant. So referred to us at 6 p.m. on Friday, 25th March last year, a couple of years ago, sorry. Encephalopathy grade 3, we immediately ventilated her, CRRT, plasmapheresis, there was no compatible blood group donor, mother was ABO incompatible, was willing for transplant. So this is a Friday evening, ABO incompatibility is the only option, the family has no money. Through this paid forward, we were able to raise 16 lakhs in 8 hours. So money was out. We did the donor workup, gave rituximab, decided that we will do Plex, started transplant 31 hours after presentation. Did a transplant starting at 1 a.m. on Sunday, finished at 2 p.m. on Sunday, extubated 43 hours later, and 87 hours of presentation to us, discharged on day 17, on admission, 48 hours, and at discharge. So this is someone with no resources who got transplanted within a day. Rajdeep Mondal from Kolkata developed jaundice when he was an infant, 2013, developed worsening, came to us. We felt that he had Alagille syndrome at age 8. He developed liver failure. His father was going to be the donor, but he developed kidney disease. So there was no donor, the family had no resources. This is what this child looked pre-transplant. A 13-year-old boy had had a head injury and came to us. The family agreed to donate his organs, so we got this child on the last flight from Calcutta. The next day he got transplanted, and this is him post-op, and this is him back home. Now, a transplant like this would not have been possible unless we had dedicated donors who were willing to give money at 1 hour's notice. So standard transplant 13 lakhs, high risk 15, 6, but that's not enough. So now if anyone has a BPL card, no resources, we're able to transplant them. And the reason why we are able to transplant them, because the Indian economy is booming, in the 3rd largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, 5th largest in terms of nominal GDP. And if India had not changed, this would not have been possible. This is Sanjay, the first child we transplanted. This is him at discharge. This is him a year later, and this is him 9 years later, 15 years later. That's when a postage stamp came out. Just going to need about 10 seconds, so if you just indulge with me and allow these last couple of slides. He joined medicine at the age of 19. He graduated and now works as a doctor, and we were overjoyed when he got married earlier this year. So the first liver transplant recipient hopefully will become a father soon. And for us, it's been a great journey. A child born in India with biliary atresia in 1950s had a 0% chance of survival. Then came Kasai's enterostomy, born in 1990s, would have a 20% survival chance. Born today, have an 87% chance. But more importantly, I think we are happy that money has gone out of the equation, and we can now offer hope to any family with a child with liver failure, irrespective of their ability to play. Thank you very much.